All right. Welcome to the React Elements and Components video. My name is Greg. I am from Atypical Engineer, and in this video, we are going to talk about elements in React. We are going to talk about components in React, and we'll just build a couple very basic components just to solidify the ideas. This video is part of a series of videos that I'm doing, which is a very basic introductory course to React. You build a Pokedex in React and push it onto a live server. So if you're interested, you can check out the other videos on this playlist, or you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel. For now, let's get started talking about elements and components. Okay, so many people start learning React by learning components, but we're just going to briefly talk about elements first. An element is just a JavaScript object, but it's basically a description of a component that's going to go into your document object model or whatever gets rendered onto the screen of your browser. The element typically has a name, it has some properties, and it has some children. But all of this is a little bit more detailed than we really need to go into. I just kind of want to talk about how to write them and how we can use elements before we move on to components. If we go over to the screen share, we can basically see that we are at a hello world stage of a React application. And you can get to here by watching the previous videos in this playlist. It leads literally right up to this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace this app component that came with the Create React app with our own element that we're going to write ourselves. We're going to go with the most easy to write format and not worry about the React create element stuff. And we're just going to declare an element at line 6 here. So let's go ahead and declare a JavaScript object and then just make it a header with some text in it. Now there's nothing special about the word element, that's just the word that I chose. But here we're basically describing what a DOM node should look like, and we're assigning it into a JavaScript object. So this is pretty cool. And what we can do is we can go into the render function and we can replace app with the element that we just wrote. So let's comment out app and let's just write element in here with a comma at the end. And then when we save, we see in the browser that our changes are reflected. So if you expand the div id equals root, then you see your element as one of the children of that root. So now you've assigned what appears to be a header tag, and you've assigned that to the element object, and then you've just put that object in the React DOM render, and now you're getting an H1 into the browser. So that is pretty cool. So there's a couple things about elements. First, you have to be wrapped in a top level tag. So anytime you're doing, like if I wanted to do two H1s, I couldn't do that. I would have to have a div or some other tag wrapping them. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a div tag, and now we're going to add two elements here, and we're going to save, and we're going to see that this is going to work too. Okay, so the element can have more. It doesn't have to be limited to just one HTML tag. It can be a whole tree of information that can get displayed in your browser. So again, this is pretty cool. But it actually gets even more interesting. So it turns out that we can nest elements as well. So let's go ahead and just create a second element. I'll create a second element called item. And then I'm just going to put it into the React DOM.render function just to make sure and test that it's working. And finally, I'll take our item element and I will put it inside our original element inside the div tag. And when I call this element, the item element, I'm going to put it inside curly braces. And that's just telling JSX that it needs to interpret a JavaScript object. Now I'll go back down and I'll put element in the React DOM.render function. And we can see that we get the initial header. We get the paragraph tag that we put into the element, and we also get the item that we had defined up top. So now these are nested. And now you should start to be able to understand some kind of pattern, okay? Because now I can just go and use a whole bunch of items, and when I save it, I see all of the items on the screen. So this repetitive nature of elements and the fact that you can nest them means you can really kind of build an entire tree to put into your document. And this is kind of how React works. So elements are definitely cool and they are of use. However, you might be noticing a problem, and that is that React elements are not, they're immutable. So once you create an element, you can't change its children or its attributes. And this is a severe limitation. So that's where components come in. So let's talk about components now. Components basically let you split the UI into independent reusable pieces and think about each piece in isolation. Conceptually, components are kind of like JavaScript functions. They accept arbitrary inputs and they return React elements describing what should appear on the screen. Now, the fact that they're functions means that you can pass input into them, which means that you can change what they return depending on the input. Let's take a look. So to do that, we'll head right back over to the code editor. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the top and we're going to create our very own first component. We're going to call it const item with a capital I. And we're going to call it that way because React always wants you to start components names with a capital letter. This little box is pulled straight off of the React documentation. And it treats components starting with lowercase names as DOM tags. So div and h1 and those types of things. But welcome with an uppercase W will represent a component. So in our case, the item with uppercase I will represent a component. So we're going to name it a capital item. And then we're going to use this syntax. So we say there's a const item, and it's going to equal a function that is defined with its argument inside of these parentheses, and then there's a little arrow function that goes to the curly braces, and then the function body goes inside the curly braces. This is a syntax that was introduced with ES6 in JavaScript, and it makes it a lot easier to read and just to write JavaScript code. So I really like using the arrow function, so we're going to use that here. So this is what we want. The const item equals parentheses props, and then the arrow with the curly braces. And then we're going to go ahead and it needs to have a return statement because it's a function. So the return will just return a paragraph tag with a little sentence inside it. So this is our first component. Okay, it's a function. It has props as its argument. It is using the arrow function, and it is returning a paragraph tag with a sentence inside it. Now, in order to use this item, we're going to go down into our element, and we are going to use this like we've seen the app component used down in the React DOM.render. That means we open the tag, we have the capitalized item, and then we have a closed tag all in one element. And when we save, you can see that this essentially calls the function that then returns the paragraph tag that says this is the item component. And now we have the item component on the screen. So awesome. We have written our first component. And React is just a whole bunch of these components all stacked together, all combined, nested, etc. So let's go ahead and keep moving here. This still isn't really that interesting because there is nothing dynamic about this component. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a name, and we're just going to say its name is, and then put in the curly braces because we need to tell JavaScript that it needs to treat this as an object. And then we're going to put in props.name. So every single component gets an argument input, something called props. Now this is a little confusing at first because if you go down and you say name equals Gregory, this is actually going to work, but it's just because props is a JavaScript object. So when this gets passed in, you can say props.name, or you can add another field in the component declaration down there on line 23, and it will be props. Whatever you called that second field. Okay, so you can get as big of an object as you want as input in this props. And if I go ahead and save this now, you'll see that it reflects correctly. So now I'm saying this is an item component and its name is Gregory. So that's really cool. Now we have created a component that takes an argument. And as you might expect, we can actually just make a whole bunch of copies of this component, and we can pass in a different name each time. And we should expect that the output when we save this will be to display all of these names right in a row. And you can see that that is indeed what happens. So the reusable nature of components is already showing. And this is really cool. Like when you think about how menus or anything that just has a lot of elements that look the same are built, this greatly reduces the workload. So let's talk about a different syntax for the arguments of a component. So if I go up here and I make another component called foo, and if I want to specify the name of the arguments I actually care about, okay, then I can put a curly brace in as my arguments and then say the actual argument names. And now I can just refer to whatever input I'm passing as just name. However, if I pass something that isn't specified in the curly braces, then you won't be able to pick it up inside the component. So either way is okay. I like to specify my argument names explicitly, but I've seen it done both ways. So either way, we're just going to demo. So now we'll go down here and we'll add some foo components. And this time we'll use female names. And as we save, we will see that it works exactly the same. So both of our components are fine, both work. It works both ways. You can choose your preference. Now we've built some components, we've passed in arguments, and you saw that elements could nest before. So let's go ahead and demonstrate the nesting of actual components. So as with the element before, when you return something, it has to be wrapped in a top level tag. So we'll wrap our item, our results of item in a div. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the foo from down in the element and we're going to paste it into the component that is called item. And we're going to save this like this, except for we're going to put in a bunch more female foo names. And now we should expect to see 3 female names underneath the this is the item component. Its name is whatever the name is that we're passing in. So you can see over here on the left, we have a component, its name is Gregory, and then we have the 3 female names, then we have the component Jake, and then the 3 female names, and this happens 4 times because that's how many items we have in the element. This is a little bit confusing to me. There's too much output, so I'm going to delete everything except for the single item with the name of Ryan, and then we're going to leave all the foo with the female names in the item, and we'll delete, and now we can understand a little bit more of what's happening. So we have the constant element that has a header, hello element, and then we have a paragraph. This is a test. And then that calls a component with an argument with name of Ryan. And then in the component section, or in the component code, we have a return statement that returns a paragraph saying that it's an item component. We can see that. And then we have a nested component, each with a different name. And then when we go to the nested component definition, we see that this just returns a paragraph tag that states the name that was the argument for that component. Okay, so we're directly able to map all of this over to the output on the right. Now, just for completion's sake, we're going to add the item element into this item component, okay, by using the curly braces and just putting the item name there. And you can see that this is an item. Elements are composable comes up on the screen. Okay, so you can still add elements into components. All of this works fine. And if you go over to the browser on the side and you inspect, then you see all of the things that we put in on the left side, and they're in the actual HTML of the page. So this was just a basic summary of elements and components. Most of React is just kind of doing this over and over again with different UI elements and structuring it properly. We're going to go down and, the app tag down here is still commented. We're going to uncomment it because in the next video, we're going to actually start to modify things in the app. But now you can kind of understand this app is analogous to our capitalized item component. Okay, and so it's defined in app.js. We'll go in and modify that component in the next video. But if you want to jump ahead, then you can go ahead and check out app.js and look at how that's defined and see what kind of similarities you can pull from this video. So thank you so much for watching. If you're still here at the end, that's awesome. I'm super appreciative, and I hope this is helping people. So if you like this video and you want to continue on with the series, then go ahead. I'll have another one out very soon that continues right where this one left off. Thank you so much.